beeping has suddenly gone quiet, so I think I might jump in here and make start something. Oh, it started up again. There may well be some other people joining as we go. We've currently got over 80 attendees in the room at the moment and presenters as well, which is an absolutely fantastic turnout. So pleased and delighted that so many of you are interested. And this is our first virtual learning cafe with, as you know, on the topic of parenting. And the first of many is our plan. We have an hour and a half in total today. My name's Gail Gibbons. I'm Head of Change for Children's Services and Health at the Youth Endowment Fund, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting today. You'll notice that we are recording the session, so if this is something that concerns you, then do feel free to turn off your camera so that we don't have your face on record. But the reason we're recording it is that we would like to share with colleagues who weren't able to make today. And we'll probably put the recording up on our website, on our Children's Services page as well. So we have three, in fact, fantastic presenters today. Our first presenter is Kirsten Asmussen from Foundations, where she is Head of Child Development. And Kirsten, for those who don't know her, has got an absolutely extensive knowledge of parenting interventions and what works in this arena. So I know, having seen her slides, that the presentation is going to be really fascinating. And do, as she's talking it through, have a think about any questions that you might want to ask her. Immediately after Kirsten's presentation, we will have some time for questions at that point, before then leading in to a joint presentation by Matt Buttery and Claire Halsey. Matt is the Chief Executive and Associate Professor of Triple P UK and Ireland. And Claire also works for Triple P UK and Ireland, and she's a implementation consultant for research and training. So they're going to talk through the Triple P approach, which has got a very strong evidence base internationally, and also, as many of you know, is delivered in the UK as well. And also touching on some of the work that they're doing through the Youth Endowment Fund funding, which about a trial that we're sort of progressing forward with. So without any further ado, I shall now hand over to Kirsten, who will present to us first.
Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
We can see it, but it's not in presentation mode at the moment. It's going
to be in presentation. Yes. Yeah. So just to say to everybody, first of all, Gail, thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm thrilled to be here to talk about my career passion, which is parenting interventions. This is going to be a bit of a two-parter in terms of the presentation. The first part is just going to provide really a high-level overview about why parenting interventions should be offered in conjunction with maybe some other evidence-based models. And then we're going to get into some of the details, not too many details, but some of the details about why we think they work and what we hope that they can achieve. So starting with a little bit of a potted history about evidence-based parenting support, or evidence-based support more generally, I think many roads, let's put it this way, lead back to the Maryland scale. And this is a scale basically about grades interventions in terms of what they work. In terms of how they work. This was developed in the 90s. It's based on the work underpinning the Cochrane collaboration. And basically, the idea is that there are different levels of evidence. I'm sure many of the people in the audience are quite familiar with these. But with the establishment of this scale and other similar evidence hierarchies, people started to think we really need to be much more strategic in terms of what we offer in all fields. Actually similar scales that existed in agriculture and medicine prior to this, but this was applied specifically to interventions developed for children and families, that we can make choices about what works. And so a what works movement was started, not just because of the scale, but because of the promise of which evidence-based might help us pick better interventions, as opposed to things that we don't know if they work or if we know that they don't work. And I think that that's one thing that's missing from this diagram of this scale, is that there was also a not effective category. And one of the things that really brought this to the fore was actually the tragic Columbine shooting in the United States, where people started to, rightly so, after it happened, the Surgeon General's review started to look at what could we do instead of this to potentially prevent youth crime. And they noticed that much of what was being offered at the time was not evidence-based. And in fact, we had evidence to show that some of these activities didn't work at all. And some of them actually made things worse. And that was through a very robust evaluation informed by the Maryland scale. So the idea is that we could use these evidence hierarchies to make better investment in interventions, and also offer the most effective ones at scales. And so there was first in the United States, but then throughout the world, really global interest in making this happen. And the UK, by the way, was at the forefront of this interest. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been achieved since the early 2000s in this space and how parenting interventions have been incorporated to it. So in the United States, there were a number of clearinghouses at foundations. We have one that we've inherited from the Legacy Early Intervention Foundation that identifies interventions with evidence. In the United States, there was Blueprints for Healthy Child Development. The Office of Youth Justice also had one. There was one for substance misuse programs, which included programs for youth, et cetera. These clearinghouses were developed. And then there were a number of fundamentally statewide initiatives developed to increase the use of these interventions. In the state of Pennsylvania, this was Prosper. Similarly, there was Communities That Care that was developed in the state of Washington, but utilized in other states throughout the U.S. Washington State also had an incentive program to increase the use of parenting interventions and other evidence-based interventions throughout communities with the aim of saving money from building another prison. And South Carolina came out with the rollout of PPP, which I'm assuming that Matt will talk about. And now more recently, California has been doing this in the interest of trauma-informed care practice. And the reason I mentioned these is certainly the first two, or actually the first two and PPP we know have evidence of improving outcomes at the population level. And that's quite important for countries because you can actually not only improve the lives of families, you can save money on things like prisons or mental health care, et cetera. And many of these interventions could have been delivered through school, but many of them were also parenting interventions. And so at least three of those examples, Pennsylvania, Communities That Care, and South Carolina actually have robust RCT evidence showing that they work. A few features that are worth discussing here, and then we'll maybe come back to this at the end, is that they were based on very strong observational evidence. The models were not just, they weren't developed based on somebody's hunch, but actually on things that people had done through very careful analyses of some of it being cohort data. Quite often the models then were developed in universities with federal money. And then the most robust evaluations were funded by the federal government. They were multi-state demonstration projects, they were called, because they weren't just there to prove a point about the intervention, but also about what this category of intervention could do. And that there had been strong investment in the 90s. And that even now to this day, U.S. states get federally funded ring fencing that has been voted into law. And two examples of these is the delivery of home visiting interventions that have a parenting component, and now most recently the Families First prevention initiative, which includes many parenting interventions with some suggestion that they could reduce the need for children to go into care and states receive a considerable entitlement to implement these interventions as an alternative to out-of-home placement. Similarly, at the same time, the country of Norway started to invest quite heavily in these interventions, but they restricted the list. I didn't say previously in the previous slides that states had basically a menu that they could choose from based on their local needs. And all of the interventions on that menu had a strong evidence base, but they also were provided with quite a bit of choice. In the state of Norway, the choice was severely restricted to really 4 sets of activities that they were expected to roll out. So basically, they had no choice. They had to roll them out. It was just about how much and where and how. But they had to roll out these models. This included a brief parent management training that was offered to families identified as needing it because they were having difficulty with the behavior of a child. And then there was also a package of multi-tiered school-based support aimed at preventing bullying, as well as reducing problematic behavior in school. There was Generation PMTO, which I know that YEF is now working with Tom McBride and his team to see if that might be feasible in this country to help families dealing with very serious difficulties with their children's behavior. And then multisystemic therapy, multisystemic therapy for child abuse and neglect, functional family therapy, and treatment foster care, Oregon, for families where there was a documented case of child maltreatment or the child was at risk of being taken away from home. So these were this was the options basically that Norway had. So there was no choice in the commissioning of these interventions, rather more about how much rather than whether, but they received high levels of support at the national level. And there's ongoing consensus that over the last 20 years that this has led to significant demands on both children's social care and the criminal justice system. Then in the UK, there's been strong interest in investment since that time, starting with the new Labour government in implementing evidence-based activities in various initiatives, which include Sure Start, On Track, the National Academy for Parenting Practitioners, and Family Nurse Partnership. And in all of these activities, the findings were equivocal, with some studies showing some improvement and others showing none. And so I think that the use that these mixed findings have perhaps hampered the use of these interventions in the UK. But nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that there have been some evaluation success. This is leading to some interventions being embedded now, although maybe more patchily, but embedded in UK practice. 2 examples are Incredible Years, and the other is Triple P, which Matt's going to talk about later. MST also had a very successful first evaluation in the UK. The second robust evaluation was not as positive. It did show, in fact, that MST did improve outcomes for youth, but not any better than business as usual, although business as usual was enhanced for that study. But so the point is that there were very positive gains for children, but they weren't different than in the regular system. But there was also some evidence to suggest that it might have been a little bit cheaper. And then there was also the Family Nurse Partnership Program, which is viewed as a parenting intervention. It's a little bit different than the ones I'm going to talk about today. Initially, it was not viewed as a success, with the evaluation showing no improvements. But now in the follow-up, it's showing that significant improvements in the children who were recipients of the program in terms of their EYFSP scores and also their first key stage scores. So I think history might, in fact, show that the rollout was successful, but certainly it's been the case with the follow-up. As I mentioned already, though, there were a couple of failures aside from the first FNP evaluation, including functional family therapy and MST. There are a couple of points that are worth bearing in mind here is that compared to the other 2 countries, there's been a lack of a sustained investment of championing evidence-based parenting interventions in comparison to the other countries. And local authorities are expected to do much of the heavy lifting by comparison, and particularly when it comes to the installation and sustained investment in these programs. And what we find continuously is when these interventions are started up, there's sometimes some good results or there's a lot of enthusiasm for them. But if you have a change in leadership or whatever, then the scale up is no longer sustained. And this is the last slide, I believe, before I go into the what are we going to get from parenting interventions and the scale up of them. But this diagram here that we developed for what works for improving the lives of England's most vulnerable children is that in the middle of the intervention there, in this bullseye, let's call it that circle, is that the intervention developers are responsible for the content, the format, how many weeks it is, etc. Hopefully some quality assurance systems, which include systems for making sure that the intervention is delivered as it was intended, i.e. with fidelity, and also hopefully some advice about the target population and who the intervention should target during the delivery process. But the local areas need to make decisions about how that intervention is going to offer value over their current provision, whether or not they have the right resources and workforce available to deliver it, and whether they've got the right referral systems for implementing it. And also on top of all of this, to make sure that it works as it's being delivered, you need robust monitoring and evaluation systems. So that's a little bit different in the UK than the other examples that I gave you. Both in Norway and the United States, there's also help to local areas on the outer layers of that bullseye, whereas in the UK, in many of the rollouts, it's only been centered around the providers giving the purple bit in the middle and the local authorities coming up with their own resources to make judgments about the other activities. So let's talk about, this is a bit of a switch, but we're going to go into the detail a little bit about parenting interventions. And by the way, when I'm doing this, I can't see a clock. So if I'm running out of time or anything, people please tell me and I will speed up. But we're going to start out here is, so how might parenting interventions make a difference and how do they work? I have a little video of my cousin's daughters. The one on the left is 2 and the one on the right is 3.5. And this is going to be very short because I think it's not going to take very long for you to get the point.
Tiana, give Kailani. Give Kailani. Take it.
So I think everybody's going to recognize that video of a 2-year-old having what 2-year-olds are good at, and that's a temper tantrum. And that's, by the way, completely and totally natural behavior for 2-year-olds to engage in. Multiple studies now have confirmed that children at around age 2 or a little bit before are more aggressive than they are at any other point in their development. And what the little girl in the pink vest was doing was actually trying to get a toy from her sister. And when she didn't get it, she grabbed it and was actually, what you didn't see here is she actually hit her sister. And then she went on to have a temper tantrum. This is completely normal behavior. But if you look at the purple line in the graph here, is that around 2, just around 2 or 2.5, this behavior starts to taper off, and aggressive child behavior really goes to much lower and then remains stable throughout development. However, the yellow line in the graph shows that that in some families, that aggressive child behavior becomes worse. And so you see it getting actually gradually worse throughout preschool until they get to elementary school, primary school. And at that point, it doesn't get much worse in terms of hitting and physical fighting, etc. But it does become more passive in that you don't see it. It might express itself in terms of lies, and other forms of non-aggressive noncompliance. And at this point, too, that children are at risk of being rejected by most peers, but finding a group of deviant peers who reinforce the aggressive behaviors. So the aim of these interventions is to stop this progression of aggressive behavior that could happen if children don't outgrow it during the preschool years. Now, the key point here is that the majority of parents learn how to manage their child's aggressive / non-compliant behavior. They don't necessarily need to go to school for this. Some of it do it better than others, but children either kind of outgrow it because they gain language skills and that helps them negotiate for the things that they want. Parents learn how to successfully on their own, how not to reinforce it and to reinforce positive behavior. And so most parents don't necessarily need loads of support to stop this behavior. However, there are some things that happen that make it difficult for parents to do this. Part of it is just high levels of parental stress. It could be economic stress. It could be marital stress or relationship stress. It could be mental health difficulties or other family adversities that kind of lower the parents' bandwidth for dealing with non-compliant child behavior. And also they might have coercive parenting behaviors that maybe they learned from their own parents, or a style how they engage with their children when their children are behaving in ways in which they don't want to. So this individual on the left is named Gerald Patterson, and he came up with this theory of coercive parent-child interactions through thousands and thousands of hours of watching parents and children interact in their homes, also children and teachers interacting, and found that these coercive cycles have very similar pattern, and that basically the parent or the teacher might ask the child to do something, and the child doesn't want to do it, so the child behaves in some kind of a non-compliant way. And then at this point, the teacher or parent might become more angry or demanding rather than maybe asking the child in a different way or ignoring certain aspects of noncompliance. And the child refuses even more adamantly, and in some cases might start to tantrum or become quite aggressive. And then at which point the parent may respond in an aggressive way, and the child becomes even increasingly more aggressive, at which point either the parent kind of gives in to the child's requests, or the parent uses even more aggression to stop the child. Now, the problem with this cycle is that children, instead of learning how to behave, learn that aggressive behavior is the way of resolving conflicts. And so even if their wish is, or they get the parent gives into the child, or doesn't give into the child, the child learns that aggressive behaviors are nevertheless rewarding. But in many instances, the child does get the parent to back off, in which case then they've learned how to behave aggressively, and they bring those skills with them to other contexts. So the idea of the parenting interventions is to provide parents with a new set of skills to avoid these coercive cycles. And so just looking at this from a perspective of theory of change is basically all young children behave in aggressive and non-compliant ways. Some, not all, but some caregiver responses might increase the likelihood of aggressive child behavior. And then so parents are taught strategies to reverse or change these behaviors. And once parents learn the new strategies sufficiently, they can implement them with their child. The child's behavior improves, and any further risk of the child engaging in aggressive behavior at school or in the community is hopefully nipped in the bud. What's the content of these interventions? I'm not going to go into great detail, but fundamentally the active ingredient is rewarding children for good behavior. And the great thing about this is that actually, it's children really like to be rewarded for these things. They like these positive interactions with their parents. Parents need to do it in a very sensitive way. And not only does it help children avoid aggressive behavior, but it teaches children how to behave nicely. So one of the very first part of any parenting intervention, at least the ones that I'm aware of, is to start teaching parents or helping parents what I would call catch their child being good and make sure that they praise their child or provide other kinds of incentives for that good behavior. Another thing that parents learn later on in the intervention is how to sanction unwanted child behavior. This is a picture that I like about a child having a timeout. They're supposed to be age appropriate. There's loads of evidence showing that this is very useful for helping children kind of calm down and manage their emotions and stop persisting in aggressive behavior. It also helps the parent calm down to a certain degree. And then on the right here, I've got a picture of reward sticker charts. Certainly when I use these with my own children or when I've used them in the context of delivering parenting interventions, I think people are quite surprised if you give them to a child, let's say ages 6 to 9, how well they work in terms of reinforcing really positive behavior and also letting children giving children a gentle warning as to when their aggressive behavior could get a sticker taken away. So what do we know about these parenting interventions and how do they make a difference? So going back to our theory of change, we do know that young children naturally behave in aggressive and non-compliant ways. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that all parents need to go on a parenting intervention. And in fact, Francis Gardner and colleagues just have completed yet another one of a series of systematic reviews showing that parenting interventions work best on what we call the targeted level, less so on the universal level, particularly in developed countries where there are a lot of resources for parents. However, on the targeted level, where parents are having issues with aggressive child behavior, they seem to work very, very well. A couple of things that we know about these interventions is that parents are actually more motivated to attend them when they perceive that there's a need, when they perceive that there's a problem with their child's behavior. And the higher the need of the parent, the higher the impact the intervention will have on the child's behavior if it's delivered to a high quality and it's reaching the parents as it should be. Another thing that we know is that these interventions tend to do better when the content is age appropriate, because in a sense, that age appropriate content gives parents more dosage. So if it's to children, and I'm not talking like to an age of like age 18, spike 3.5 years, we're talking about age bands like preschool, primary school, etc. That parents have more content that's more specific to their circumstances that they can use in homework with their children. And by the way, that's another thing that I should say about the intervention here that I haven't put on here is that homework, role play, opportunities to engage parents and coach them in these activities also appears to be a very important ingredient in these interventions. These interventions can be delivered to groups of parents or at the individual level, and they vary. Evidence-based models vary anywhere between 8 to 20 weeks. And we know from many, many robust evaluations that parents can learn to correctly implement new strategies. And it's interesting because other parenting outcomes, for example, mood or levels of stress, don't necessarily need to improve when they learn these new skills, nor is that a prerequisite for them to learn how to implement these new skills correctly. They need to come to the interventions and they need to be exposed to the content and they need to get the coaching. But once they learn them, they can learn them in a way that it sticks. And when the intervention is meeting the families that it should and implemented with fidelity, some studies show that child behaviors can improve quite quickly and dramatically, looking at effect sizes of anywhere of 1.0 to 1.5, which is kind of amazing. However, what we don't know, and I'll get into this in the last slide, is how long these effects last. There's some evidence, for example, around in the UK with Incredible Years, showing that it could last for around 10 years. But the extent to which just a parenting intervention on its own improves behaviors in children's behavior in school or as they get older requires further testing. a few other things to think about with parenting interventions is that improved parenting behaviors on a result of the intervention is not a proxy for improved child outcomes. So we've seen examples where parenting behaviors are not, or certainly parenting mood hasn't changed the way we might like it to, or parenting attitudes might have changed a little bit, but child behavior improves anyway. However, we see the exact opposite as well, where parenting behaviors seemingly improve and child outcomes don't. So that's just something to bear in mind. Ideally, these interventions should always be testing for improvements in children's behavior, and hopefully parenting behavior will improve as well. I think that this is a measurement issue in many instances. As I kind of touched on previously, specificity is important. This means that interventions will work best when they're age specific, but also targeted to the level of need, meaning that parents need to perceive that they need them as well. Referral systems help. And that is, when we talked with that bullseye slide about how the local area can help make sure that they get used and they make a difference and they reach the families who most need them. A referral system, perhaps from a health visitor or from a teacher, can really make sure that the intervention reaches the family who needs it. We're also finding that some parenting interventions, if children are having behavior problems at school, a parenting intervention on its own may not be enough. It should be aligned with school support to make a sustainable difference. And that means that it's better if the teacher is also using similar strategies to reinforce positive child behavior, and that schools also are doing things to promote these positive behaviors throughout the school, but maybe work more specifically with a child in the classroom as well. This is particularly true in the case of attention deficit disorder. Another point worth bearing in mind when I was talking about the theory of change underpinning these interventions, it's commonly referred to as social learning theory, and it's a theory that underpins many of the effective parenting interventions that are available today across all age groups. But it's worth understanding that when children reach adolescence, they're usually part of the intervention as well. They're discussing the intervention with a child happens, and so you start to have additional components that are informed, for example, by systemic family therapy, etc. So I'm done now, and I hope I didn't overrun time. I honestly, I could hear things chiming, but I couldn't see anything in the chat, but I will stop sharing my screen down. Now, hopefully there's time for questions.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was fascinating. And yeah, the chiming was just extra people coming into the meeting as you were talking. So has anybody got any questions for Kirsten at this stage? Just raise your hand using the function at the top, or if you like, you can also put a question into the chat as well, if you're feeling slightly more shy, and then we can read your question out instead. Or you might want to digest a little bit and we can add, I can see there's one coming now, but we can add questions for Kirsten after the second presentation as well. But to start with, we have Jabir who has a question. Over to you, Jabir.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Kirsten, for that. Kirsten, lots of information there on behaviour, particularly parental behaviour as well as children's behaviour, but not much on structural factors that might be at play in terms of children's experiences of being brought up and so on. Could you say a little more about that? Is that not important, or are we not looking at it?
It is important, but first it would be helpful to understand what you mean by structural factors.
Well, everything from the experience of poverty to racism to gender inequality.
Well, we can talk about, not sure about gender inequality. I mean, we do know that these interventions are more frequently attended by mothers. There is some suggestion that the outcomes might be stronger if they're attended by both parents. I think what's interesting, though, is that the outcomes tend to be pretty good if they're attended by just one parent, and that both fathers and mothers can learn the things that are taught at the interventions equally well. In terms of structural issues, obviously poverty is a very important stress that families experience, and is frequently linked to poor behavioral outcomes that could be linked to parenting. But we know that low-income families benefit from these interventions as much as higher income families, and this has been tested multiple times and in big systematic reviews in the series by Frances Gardner that I mentioned. And also interestingly, that the findings that I'm reporting here are observed almost in every country in which the two big ones that I would call IY and Triple P have been implemented. So you're seeing very, very similar results. You're not, and that's a surprise. I think people thought that there would be differences across different ethnicities or cultural practices in how these interventions were used or the effects that they have, and they're surprisingly similar, which kind of supports a hypothesis that Jerry Patterson had in the beginning, is that these supporting children in this way, rewarding positive behavior, is a good thing to do no matter who you are. This is important for child development. This is a universal. And that's what the evidence is telling us so far. Now, are there things that the interventions can do to reach out, be more appealing to different ethnic groups or different populations? Absolutely. And when this occurs, when these interventions are offered, quite a bit of due diligence is done ahead of time to make sure that the content is acceptable to these families. At the very least, they're changing the language, but they also might be changing certain, the nature of the examples, etc. Again, finding very similar results. We do find that the greater the need, the more you need perhaps more coaching or more time to develop a positive working alliance with a practitioner. And that also, actually in developing countries where where you can't just turn on the television or listen to a podcast about how to raise your children, the effect sizes are stronger than what you would be seeing in a developed country when these interventions are offered. So it's not necessarily a panacea for everybody, but there are not very many examples of where these interventions don't work in various populations. When they don't work, it has more to do with the dosage and the specificity than it does with the content.
Thanks, Kirsten. We've got quite a number of questions in the chat. What I suggest is we take the first couple and then we bring Matt and Claire on for the second presentation so that we don't shortchange them. And then we'll pick up the next set of questions at the end if we've got time, if that's okay with people. So the first question here is from Sigrid Manes, who asks, is there a difference in terms of teenage behaviour versus child behaviour improving? And that it doesn't seem to matter whether parental mood or stress levels do or do not improve, I think is the question, if that makes sense.
But for teenagers?
Yeah.
Well, the models that I spoke of, like multisystemic therapy, I mean, we're talking about, and functional family therapy, pretty intensive interventions that are offered to the entire family, including the adolescent. And the primary target person in those interventions is the child. And so, for example, with multisystemic therapy, the motto is whatever it takes. And so if it doesn't work with a parent anymore, let's say they have very severe mental health problems, or more frequently substance misuse problems, they will work with the child individually to help the child cope and independently of the parent. That's my understanding, at least, of that model. So yes, it does work differently. I think in terms of, just to give a little more context to the parental mood, and I hope I'm answering this question, it's also about the direction of causality here. So surprisingly, many parents who are, for example, who have depression or anxiety, the intervention is not going to resolve that issue. They may need additional help for that. But regardless of whether that condition improves, if they're able to learn the parenting changes in the parenting skills, the child's outcomes will improve. So I think that that's the important message. There are some interventions that show that actually as a result, and this isn't kind of a tricky analysis, that when the parent starts having better interactions with their child, their mood does improve because they have one less stress in the family. But I need to make clear that this isn't always the case. You know, parents have clinical depression. This alone is not going to be enough to change symptoms of clinical depression. And so I think that the message needs to be quite clear here about who we're talking about and how improvements of mood take place.
Thanks, Kirsten, for that. And we'll do one more question before we move over to Matt and Claire. So this is a question from Harriet Ballantyne Thomas. Thank you for your presentation. Are the findings related to interventions delivered by specialist providers only, or do they include more everyday parenting interventions, e.g. support provided by social workers?
Well, I think any of the interventions that I mentioned could be delivered by a clinician or a master's level social worker. We know that because most, evaluation, typically your most robust RCTs, or at least the first ones, you want to make sure that they are delivered under ideal circumstances. And so you get practitioners in place that you are fairly certain will understand the content of the training and be able to deliver it with fidelity. So that's why the evaluation evidence says that. However, there have been studies, many of which, for example, John Weiss at Harvard has looked at and has seen that you can have parenting practitioners, particularly group-based ones, deliver them as well as clinical psychologists or master level social workers. And so though you have more complex family needs, you probably need a more highly qualified practitioner. Additionally, we find that more qualified practitioners are better able to apply the principles of the intervention rather than just the day-to-day delivery. So the analogy I would make is you can have a cook and you can have a chef. You don't always need a chef to deliver a meal that's very, very tasty. You can get away with a cook. And this is the same with parenting interventions. However, sometimes you always need a chef to come up with maybe a new recipe or something.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kirsten. So we're going to move over to Matt and Claire, who are going to talk to us about specifically Triple P. And then there'll be further chance for questions, both to Matt and Claire, and picking up the final questions that were put in the chat for Kirsten as well. Over to you, Matt and Claire.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kirsten. I think you've done all the heavy lifting, so I think I can just whiz through this presentation and hopefully we can get to those questions. There were some good ones in the chat already. For those of you that don't know me, hi, my name's Matt Buttery. I'm the Chief Executive of Triple P UK and Ireland. We won't get into this later, so I'll say it now. Triple P as an intervention is owned by the University of Queensland in Australia. And we, Triple P International, have a license to disseminate the programme, and I'll talk a little bit later about what that means. And so I oversee that work in the Four Nations and in the Republic of Ireland and some bits of Europe. And as Gail kindly mentioned, I'm also an honorary associate professor in, I think, something like family and parenting policy and practice at the University of Warwick. Claire, do you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute. First one, someone had to do it, Claire.
After all these years as well. That shows I'm a flawed individual like most people. So my name's Claire Halsey. I'm a trainer and particularly an implementation consultant with Triple P. And I specialise in supporting implementation of research. Triple P, as you may know, is, and as you've heard somewhat from Kirsten, is an evidence-based parenting programme. And many years ago, we introduced Triple P as a sort of a training model, and we would train people and they would go away and deliver it. And we learned quite quickly that you need some implementation support to help them work with fidelity to the programme. So I specialise in that area. And prior to that, as a clinical psychologist, I worked in the field of safeguarding and in CAMS, and including delivering Triple P. So I'm very pleased to be here today to talk a bit more about the programme and its impact.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. So this is where we're going for those of you that like the roadmap. I don't think I need to say too much about the start, but we'll have a little canter through why parenting, what's the Triple P system, evidence and implementation. You're going to hear that several times, how important that is. Kirsten's bullseye diagram, which I thought was brilliant, really brought that out as well. Claire's going to talk briefly about the supportive home trial. I'm going to say briefly where Triple P is used, and then Gail asked us on the what's next in Triple P's kind of horizon scanning world. So I've got a slide or 5 on those, and I've just added back in a slide about South Carolina, Kirsten, which wasn't there, but is now. So I will mention a little bit about what Kirsten was talking about at the start of her presentation. I've got a video and I hope it's going to work because I've rebooted my computer. So let's have a go.
Being a parent can be the most rewarding thing in the world. It's a unique journey with highs and lows that sometimes require a bit of extra help. From those early days of sleep deprivation to coping with temper tantrums or fussy eating, right up to the teen years, dealing with new, unexpected emotions or anxiety. Available online to fit busy lifestyles, or something more hands-on in person, Triple P fits around every family. For parents in conflict with each other or their child, for children with additional needs, or families just needing some helpful tips. Our flexible system can help guide families when they need support. Triple P is available globally, helping millions of families from diverse backgrounds. Backed by hundreds of trials and studies and proven by parents, Triple P is there for each step of the journey.
It is after lunchtime, so I thought you deserved a video in case you were falling asleep. Why is parenting important? I think Kirsten's kind of said this, but there is clear evidence that parent-child interactions and nurturing relationships lay the foundations for family environments that produce well-adjusted children with the skills to thrive. And so, as we see from that slide, parenting affects a range of outcomes and reduces risks for social, emotional, health and behavioural problems from developing. As Kirsten said, actually evidence-based parenting programs like Triple P do have a common outcome of both child outcomes, but we also show parent outcomes. I take Kirsten's point, but also we do have from the evidence, we show that we can improve parental mental health, parental anger, couple conflict, work functioning, etc. But obviously the target outcome of intervention, these interventions is children themselves and adolescents. So what's Triple P? Well, you've hopefully seen from that video it's not one thing, although they're all called Triple P, which is both beneficial and confusing at the same time. So what is it? It's a system of 25 different interlocking parenting and family interventions. So those interventions cover from birth or pre-birth even, all the way through to parents of children aged 16. We've got a series of interventions called Stepping Stones Triple P for parents of children with additional needs up to age 12. And those interventions vary in terms of the intensity of delivery format and the delivery format itself. So you can deliver them either as groups or as one-to-one, both of which can be delivered face-to-face or what we're doing now virtually in my nomenclature. But also we've got online interventions. And by that, we mean parent self-directed, parent self-paced delivery formats of the intervention. And I'll get to the evidence for those later on, but they are non-inferior to practitioner-delivered versions of the programme. So what you've got with Triple P, therefore, is a bit of a box of bricks, as you may have seen on that video. I like to think of them a bit like a box of Lego bricks. And so you can either take out an individual brick. Brick is a good analogy. These are manualized, evidence-based programs. We know what the brick does. It's been very well characterized. We know that practitioners trained all around the world in that brick should deliver a similar program and similar outcomes. But where you build that brick into your local system model with its, sticking with my early years analogy, Play-Doh, stickle bricks, Meccano, maybe some toilet rolls and some feathers, there are a number of different places that you can build that same brick into the Triple P, into your local system model. So if you think about group triple P, which would be a level 4 intervention on my little diagram here, it's been widely delivered in children's centres and family hubs. Early help, very widely used, has been used at the very edge of care. I tripped across group triple P as a foster carer, and Claire used to deliver group triple P in CAMS. So there's one brick, one intervention. I've just given you 5 legitimate places that you could deploy it within your system model. But what you've got within the triple P system is then a whole other box of bricks. And as I say, they might vary in terms of the intensity. So, you know, where we've sort of described Kirsten's described interventions that probably feature at level 4, which are more of the targeted interventions, which would be 8-week groups or 10 weeks one-to-one or 8 sessions online. We've actually got briefer interventions as well that deal with maybe single topics that parents are coming for. So, you know, dealing with teenagers' emotions or dealing with fighting and aggression in younger children. They're one-off 2-hour interventions, which can either act as an intervention in their own right, and we've seen from the research that parents can generalise the strategies and the skills, or they might be a stepping stone to a more intensive intervention. So you might do a discussion group and then have a conversation with the practitioner who says, actually, I could do with a bit more help and support. So could I do this something slightly more intensive? At level 2 of the system, we've got very brief interventions that are very asset focused. So that's the kind of messaging of what do children need to do well in life and how can we support them as parents. Can be delivered in seminars, at say school transition events. And I mean, I've delivered to 60 parents. I've seen them delivered to over 200 parents in a room. And so you've got an evidence-based intervention that's dripping in some evidence-based strategies, largely giving a thumbs up to a lot of the parents in the room. But there'll always be some parents who come forward at the end and say, actually, that's really sparked my interest. I've got a couple more questions. Is there anything else I could go on? And again, can act as part of a natural normalisation, destigmatisation recruitment campaign. Level 1, we've got communication strategy, which helps with that recruitment normalisation. And then at level 5, jumping back to the top of the system, is actually interventions in the triple P system that address adjunct issues in the parent. So family transitions, so addressing separation and divorce. Pathways triple P, where there may be physical abuse, worries around physical abuse or emotional abuse and neglect. And it's got more CBT focused modules up there that you can draw in to other elements of triple P delivery. So what you've got with triple P therefore is an approach that can be a blended, universal and targeted approach, which not only helps reach more of the population, but also helps normalise and destigmatise parenting. Because as some survey work polling work that we did last year confirmed, 75% of parents still feel like there's stigma in asking for help with their parenting. And so what you can therefore do is combine prevention, early intervention and targeted delivery in the same system. And hence one of the strengths of them all being called triple P, because when it comes to the parent, it's all triple P. And therefore it's not started on this and now I've got to do that. You can progress in terms of dose, in terms of into specialisms. There's a couple of specialist programs in there, triple P for baby, for parents transitioning to parenthood, fearless triple P for parents whose children have anxiety management problems, and a couple of other things, but I'll leave it there. So what you can do with triple P is you can either deploy it in a very targeted model, or you can scale it into a public health model of delivery. And that's what South Carolina was about, that Kirsten talked about earlier, and I'll mention at the end. I'll come on to self-regulation in a second. Just in terms of some of the theory that underpins, Kirsten talked about, you know, some of this already, developmental theory, social learning theory, risk and protective factors, but also specifically for triple P, we're thinking quite a lot about public health, community psychology. So how can we support parents to create that secure environment that promotes children's development and psychological growth? Part of which is how do we actually reach and recruit parents to engage in interventions. I mentioned triple P is based on the kind of theories around self-regulation as well. And this is really important. So triple P is very much about empowering parents. It's not about telling them what to do. It's about asking them, what's the goal? What's the behavior? What's the belief that you want to encourage within your children or your young person? And then out of this bunch of strategies that we've got that we know are evidence-based, which tool do you want to use to apply to the goal? So you're giving parents self-management tools, you're encouraging their self-efficacy. But when they come back and say, oh, it worked, you're amazing, it's you're able to help attribute personal agency to what they did. So, you know, they went to bed when I asked them to go to bed. So that idea of being able to say, well, what did you do? What happened? What was different this time to what happened last time? Help them problem solve, leading towards self-sufficiency. And the idea of the Triple P system is to do that in a minimally sufficient enough way to help the parent achieve the goal that they've set. As Kirsten's already said, parenting programs like Triple P are underpinned by significant amount of evidence. So Triple P's got over 4 decades of research, 192 randomized control trials, there's 400 evaluations, many authors, as you can see, across many institutions, and quite importantly, 63% of those trials are independent of any of the developers of Triple P. And so not only, obviously, in the early days, developers are often the ones that do the trials on the interventions that they've developed. More of the evidence now comes from people who haven't been involved or haven't got their name as an author on the intervention. Those authors come from 41 countries. But as important as the research is the fact that it's been proven by more than 4 million parents worldwide at a very conservative estimate of the number of parents that have done Triple P. And there's a number of people there, a number of organisations, work centres, clearinghouses, etc., that recognise the strength of evidence of Triple P. What do you find from all of that evidence? Well, here you go. Let's summarise 400 evaluation studies, 192 randomised control trials into a single slide. So you do see improved child behaviour. You see reduced conduct and emotional problems, or reduced symptoms of ADHD, reduced child or teen anxiety. You do see improvements in parenting style, practice, positive parenting strategies. Parents have an increased sense of confidence, competence, satisfaction, self-efficacy, reductions in anger, stress, depression, reductions in interparental conflict, fewer attendance and academic-related behaviour problems, and improvements in rates with reduced rates of child maltreatment. And as Kirsten said, Triple P's been disseminated, well, I've told you the trials in terms of where it's come from around the world. We'd say 30 countries we actively disseminate in: high income, low income, very individualistic cultures, very collectivistic cultures, very high socioeconomic environments, very low socioeconomic environments, and you broadly get the same results from the programme. So the transportability of these interventions is clear. What we've got then with Triple P is an effective intervention. But what you all want to achieve, and what we all want to actually see from these interventions, is a socially significant outcome. And as Claire intimated at sort of the top of this presentation, we don't think that just training people in an evidence-based interventions and hoping with everything crossed that you're going to get the socially significant outcome is good enough, or is going to work, actually, from what we've learned. And so what we focused on over the last decade, 13 years within Triple P, is how can we think through the other aspects of what's important, that bullseye diagram that Kirsten put up, to ensure that we can support sites with the effective implementation of the intervention, because we know an awful lot about fidelity, we know an awful lot about ways in which you can ensure that the programme is delivered well with quality, and how you can create environments where that quality continues to improve. But we obviously need to partner with local areas on that. But what we also know is that you need enabling context. The context into which you implement these interventions is really important. The selection of practitioners is really important. You can think of it a bit like an antibiotic. If you've got a bacterial infection and you go to the doctor, and they say to you, well, the NICE guidelines say that an antibiotic would be the right treatment for a bacterial infection. That's your effective intervention. The challenge is, if the doctor doesn't say, take it every 8 hours with food and finish the course, you might chew a few, not feel any better. You might chew them all and then still not feel any better. So the effective implementation of the evidence-based treatment is really important. But it's also important for the doctor to ask you a third question, which is, are you allergic? Because if you're allergic, you might take the evidence-based intervention with absolute fidelity, but you throw everyone up and you still don't get better. So as an analogy, therefore, you can see how important those 3 parts of that sum are in achieving socially significant outcomes. And when it comes to that bullseye diagram that Kirsten has described, she only said that really intervention owners should be thoughtful about the bits in purple at the start. We actually think about all of it, including measurement, ongoing evaluation, and provide free tools to sites to support them with that, because we think all of this stuff is important. But of course, some of it is partnership with whoever is delivering the intervention. Claire, why don't I bring you in? So tell us a little bit about the trial that we're doing with the YEF.
Thanks, Matt. So I think, as you probably know, the Triple P is engaged with the YEF in a substantial RCT with a goal to see if one of our programs, the standard teen program, and by standard teen, it defines it as it's a one-to-one program that a practitioner will meet individually with a family to see if that can reduce involvement in violence, and particularly in relation to children who are approaching the edge of care. There's a lot of reasons why we're all engaged in this trial. As you know, as a society, we're very concerned about the rising levels of violence, and in particular how that impacts young people. But you can see here that the basis of this is also grounded in a YEF survey of 2,000 teens, where over a third said they've been directly affected by violence, either witnessing it or a victim. And it's becoming increasingly concerning, the level of anxiety young people face leaving home or going to different areas in their own community. So the big driving force here, and I'm probably saying something Gail will could say as well, is to create that safe, supportive home, using positive parenting as a basis for that, because there is a substantial body of evidence that where there are safe, supportive homes with consistent parenting, that stable base, that is strongly related to good outcomes for young people, including their involvement in the juvenile justice system and behaviours that can both be a risk to their community but to themselves. So that's sort of driving this along, because we want to see if we can find out whether standard teen really fits in that space and can be helpful. Triple P programs are already, I think that, I don't know, I've nearly finished that slide. They're already recommended by the Youth Justice Board, and we do see them being delivered in the UK and other places in this space. But despite our extensive evidence, it's really important that we do look specifically at this particular population to see what those outcomes can be. And it's already available, for example, in some local authorities as a social impact bond model, where it's showing some good outcomes, but it's really important to test that. Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to refresh a slightly different version of the lovely triangle that Matt showed you earlier, just to indicate where in the levels of intensity of programme standard teen Triple P sits. And by teens, we are meaning 11 to 16-year-olds. So for the purposes of this trial, it's 11 to 15-year-olds. But it is one of our more intense programmes. It's a multi-session programme, so it's 10 one-hour weekly appointments with a parenting practitioner to get the content and to practice and do all those things that Kirsten mentioned, including role play, feedback, and looking at how things are progressing. And it's designed that way because the families sort of attending at this level are usually having multiple difficulties with their child. They're not coming with a single issue around school refusal, for example. There are multiple other problems that they want to address. And sometimes they've become trapped in some unhelpful parenting practices that they really want to unpick. So it does sit up there in that quite high intensity. So as I say, for this particular trial, the YEF trial, it's families of children aged 11 to 15, and specifically on the edge of care. So those where, the outcomes, if we did nothing, will be very significant for that family and could have lifelong implications for this sense of stability and the base for that young person. And we have some, obviously with the research trial, we've worked hard with all of our sites to find a definition and with our evaluator to find this definition that's applicable. So all the young people coming through the trial and their parents are those who've not entered care, but they've been assessed as potentially likely to enter care if support's not provided to them, or they're being considered for care, but they haven't yet been removed from their family of origin. The families who can't attend the trial, who can't get involved with the trial, are those who've already received an intervention similar to Triple P, so multi-session evidence-based and manualised parenting programme in the previous 12 months, because obviously that would affect our ability to notice a difference. Or if they're currently receiving an intervention such as that. And multi-systemic therapy is also excluded due to its intensity and the impact it could have on us noticing or detecting differences. So diving into more detail, as I say, it's 11 to 15-year-olds, and it's the parents and carers of those young people. It's an RCT design, so it's an individual level randomisation by our evaluation partners at the University of Warwick. It's very particularly a support as usual model, because these families are in high need, so we don't want to deny them their usual levels of support. So whether they're intervention or control, they'll receive what they normally or typically would from the local authority, whether that's support around domestic abuse, finance, housing, etc., conflict in the family, they will still receive that. And our intervention group families will also receive standard teen Triple P, whereas controls will receive support as usual without that Triple P element. It's a 6-site trial across in England, and for each site they're going to consent 69 parents to join the trial, so over 400 across the duration of the trial. And our key question is to determine whether, of course, support as usual plus standard teen has a greater efficacy for these families or not. Both of those outcomes are really vital as to how we use standard teen globally, so it's very important. And very enthusiastic and very hard-working partner local authorities in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire, London Borough of Merton, Wirral, Gloucestershire and Birmingham. And I have to say, having met with them, I feel somewhat sorry for them weekly for quite a while, and now easing off as we start into delivery as part of our implementation support, very enthusiastic about the trial and doing a lot of hard work. The outcome measures that are going to be collected across the duration of the trial include things like the SDQ, in particular the externalising element of that scale. And because it's a long trial, we'll get quite a long period of follow-up, which is really helpful to find out if that early impact is maintained. And even longer through the YEF archiving process, which allows much longer tracking of these young people. So this is just a bit of an idea of what's within the programme. And you can see just on this slide that these are the sort of highlights of the sorts of strategies that these strategies are taught within the programme. And the vast majority of them are very much about relationships, support, helping them on that journey towards adulthood. For example, you can see that supportive relationship, rebuilding it sometimes with a family where that's fractured due to difficulties, but also making sure that there's elements of teaching new skills involved, that big drive to create independence and help young people also to manage their own behaviour and decide on how they're going to act and behave. And on top of those, in those 4 key areas, of course, we've got areas around guiding teenagers' behaviour. And that's to do with, being able to respond to rules, behave well, but also to manage teens' emotions. It's a massive time of change, isn't it, the teenage years, where those feelings and emotions can become quite dominant, and providing parents with guidance about how to react well to help teenagers manage their feelings as well as their behaviours has been vital in the programme. So plenty in there. And parents, of course, choose from these which ones they want to pay attention to match the needs of their individual teen. Very rarely would they apply every single strategy. It's very tailored by that parent using that self-regulatory framework that Matt's been talking about.
Thanks, Claire. That's really brilliant. Well, look, I just want to wrap up then with just a few brief slides in a way we're getting close to time. So where is Triple P used? Well, Triple P, if you just took England, for example, more than 60% of local authority areas in England use Triple P. And where in that system do they use it? Well, Triple P is a system. So you'll see Triple P widely used within family hubs and universal offerings of support. Triple P for Baby has just been commissioned by NHS England, and we're training 680 practitioners across the 75 family hubs in the baby intervention. We're also delivering a lot of training in the home learning environment sort of space. Don't have time to get into it, but Kirsten mentioned the importance of teachers having similar strategies to parents, and we've got a positive early childhood education program for early years educators. And so you've got some overlap there between how can we help parents and teachers, early years educators, have the same strategies. We're very widely used within early help and intensive family support, sort of section 10 space, supporting families, obviously under SEN, and as I've mentioned, the Reducing Parental Conflict Programme, the DWP rolled us out of one of the original 8 interventions that already had, also 2 of the original 8 interventions for Triple P that already had a high level of evidence and have continued to deliver in their rollout across local authorities. But as you're hearing, we also see Triple P deployed at the edge of care and within what we're now starting to call family help as per the care review. We see it in CSE, CSA. We also, as I've mentioned, have it in fostering and adoption. We're doing some really interesting work, early work around using it in the reunification space as well, particularly where teenagers have come into care late and where we might do some work to try and reunify them with their birth parents. We've mentioned youth justice, Fearless and our wider programs are being used quite widely within mental health support teams. Neurodevelopmental pathways, Triple P is often found as a first step, particularly on things like a pathway for ADHD. And we've already said that it's found within CAMS. So, remember from the 2 different versions of the triangle we've shown you, Triple P isn't one thing. And so therefore the flexibility of it to be deployed across the system is quite huge. So very briefly, what's next? I'm going to mention 4 things. This is the lightning round. You're going to get it real quick, okay, real dirty. So the first thing is we're thinking about kind of the context in which parenting occurs. So we've been doing some systems work. So we've published a piece called Joining the Dots, which is a kind of open thought piece that we've been discussing with local authorities. There's a wide number of policy areas that address for which parenting is an element of what they do, but local authorities in particular and ICBs at local level have to sort of assimilate all that information from supporting families, SEN, Start for Life, family hubs, etc. And so we've been looking at what kind of system models make the best use of available resources and ensure a cohesive joined up system that works for children and families. Can't say more, but you can read more about it there. We'll certainly circulate the slides. Thinking about online self-directed, self-paced delivery formats, Triple P is reasonably unique in this space. We've already got 7 randomized control trials that underpin that self-directed online intervention, including a recently published non-inferiority study that actually compares it with the slightly younger age range of the intervention that Claire described. So a 10-session one-to-one delivered by a Triple P practitioner, or an 8-session online intervention are broadly non-inferior. And we're doing a lot of work to digitise our interventions because we know that parents want self-guided interventions. They want to access this stuff digitally. That doesn't mean that there is the absence of a practitioner. Sometimes this is a tool in the practitioner's toolbox of, think this would be really a good idea. Do you want to do it? And then we'll check in with how it's going. Some parents might need some motivation and some sort of support to access and to go through the programme. But as you can see, 4 of our programmes already exist in this online self-directed format, and we're already developing 3 more very quickly that will be out either this year or next year. So that's the second thing. The third thing we're really interested in is public health approaches to parenting. So I didn't have this slide in, but Kirsten just teed me up to put it back in. So what she was talking about in South Carolina was a randomised control trial funded by the CDC, where 9 counties in South Carolina got Triple P in a population health model. So that kind of those seminars, those level 3 interventions and those level 4 interventions that you saw in our triangle, and 9 counties got care as usual. What you saw in a 2.5-year period was reductions in cases of child maltreatment, reductions in the number of kids going into care, and reductions in the number of A&E presentations for child maltreatment injuries. Because what you're talking about in a public health approach is not only targeting whatever families that's crossed whatever threshold you've got, you're talking about targeting those that are approaching the threshold and everybody, because parenting is a human challenge, a human concern. Because if you can move the curve half a standard deviation one way, you can affect those at the top end, and that's what South Carolina showed. We've furthered that in the Republic of Ireland, and there's some results about to come out from a large rollout in Queensland as well, where we've put digital into that intervention, and digital actually reaching into some what we've typically thought of as hard to reach groups. Finally, we're continuing to develop interventions and to look at either new iterations of Triple P or new applications of Triple P. So family life skills is for parents where there's been significant adversity in the parent's own life. And so it addresses some of those factors. We're looking at a teen version of stepping stones. Annoyingly, we've decided to call it building bridges for parents and children with additional needs. We're also looking at kind of how we can work through sport to access different sorts of parents, access dads, but also because some of the challenges within sport in terms of children's behaviour, but also in terms of adults' touchline behaviour, can be quite challenging. And so thinking about how we can move that. Triple P is always looking at these things, but we only release interventions when we've got enough evidence to say that we think they work. So none of these are available as yet, but all of these we've been working on for a number of years already. In fact, building bridges, you can see that paper is dated 2018, so the trial predates that. It's not available yet. That's just the way that we work in terms of the technology transfer agreement. So Triple P is a system of evidence-based parenting interventions that's been built over the last 40 years, range of outcomes that it has an impact on. Claire's talked to you a little bit about the trial. It's used and deployed quite widely across the system and across England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland as well, but I didn't get to mention those. And we're thinking about things like system models and how parenting might be a golden thread that helps us use resources more widely, thinking about online and how we reach more parents, thinking about public health models, and continuing to develop programs to try and meet current emerging needs and different service models. We'll circulate these slides, but for more questions, for more information, you can certainly go to our website, and there's a load of case studies on there as well as other things.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Matt. Really, really interesting. And Claire, who's just had to leave us, really, really interesting presentation there. We've got time to pick up some of these questions. If anyone's got any questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. We've already got a couple in the chat. One, Matt, from Natalia Cole about the trial, the YEF funded trial. When are we expecting the final report?
Well, it's a very good question, Natalia. We're just recruiting families now, and so it will run until 2025. So we won't find out the answers, as it were, until 2025 when we've done the analysis.
And just to add to that, we do, YEF publishes all our evaluations, and when they're available, they'll all go up on our website, and we communicate about them through our newsletter, etc. So it's a while off yet, but keep your eyes peeled for that point. And then the second question that was in the chat from earlier is from Sandra Beaton. Matt, are you able to talk about how parents get access to Triple P, and are there instances where it is compulsory, for example, through a family court scenario?
Gosh, that's another really good question, isn't it? Sandra, it depends. It depends on where and how Triple P is being made available by the providers of Triple P. So if it's a local authority, or if it's CAMS, or if it's being offered through schools or through family hubs. So we would love it if parenting was universally accessible. And what we saw in that Ireland trial, which I didn't get to talk about, was actually when you make these sorts of interventions of different levels of intensity available to parents and say to parents, why don't you choose which level of intensity you want to access? On average, judged by the total problem score on the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, which is a good overall sort of metric of problems in families that they're experiencing, there's a lovely waterfall down through level 4, level 3, level 2 in terms of the sign up. So on average, parents can find their way to the right level of intensity of intervention. The reality is that these interventions sometimes are tied up in services where actually they've got reasonably high thresholds, or they've got low, because they've got low numbers of staff or resources. And so it really is a bit of a mosaic in terms of how you might get access to them. Are they compulsory? Yes. sometimes these programs are made as CAFCAS might recommend triple P, a family judge might recommend triple P. We would always say that parents are much more likely to do things if you don't tell them that they've got to do it. And I sort of mentioned that in terms of self-regulation earlier on, you know, allowing them to set their own goals, allowing them to come to this, they choose their own strategies. But yeah, sometimes this is mandated and it can work for families in those instances. It's not what we would necessarily recommend. But as we say, we're somewhat in partnership with those that deliver triple P, and that has a variety of factors that makes the decision about how widely available these interventions were. I would love it if you go to Australia right now, and this is, we just won a tender for this, but it could have been another parenting program. Triple P online, all of those online interventions are available universally for any parent to access, and are also being dovetailed into different service offers. So, you know, things like the neurodevelopmental pathway, early help, family hubs, they could be dovetailed into. I would love to see us do something like that in the UK, making high quality, evidence-based, importantly, interventions available at that kind of population level. Because what we've seen is sometimes that, well, we've seen that aids recruitment and that helps route parents to the right level of intensity of intervention.
Thanks, Matt. Sandra, do you want to come back in? I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, please. It's good to hear the variety and the flexibility that there is available. Unfortunately, you seem to be saying that it's all at the too late level of intervention, which is where we've been for so long. If we could perhaps move things on a little bit earlier, especially with the moves towards learning exclusions at school, that if we could start getting interventions in place at school, through school, then we can really begin to make some progress, I think.
Sandra, I think you're absolutely spot on. The Centre for Mental Health did some really good research about a decade ago now, and they said the place that parents go to first when they need help is they either go to the school or they go to their GP. And actually, when that Ireland trial, that I didn't get to mention, I think it's something like of parents of under 8-year-olds in the particular area that they were looking in terms of gathering the data, 36% of those parents attended something triple P. So they actually attended an intervention. Now, a lot of the work was done by level 2 and level 3. About 10% of parents did the level 4 intervention, and Kirsten would tell you that's probably about right in terms of prevalence rates, that about 10% do that kind of more targeted intervention. But what was really interesting for us, who was absolutely key to helping us generate that kind of reach? Schools. When principals, when head teachers normalised this and said, here you go, this is on, particularly at transition events, we found really powerful way of engaging with parents. Actually, you get 70-80% of parents turn up to those sorts of events. And as I said, they can be, for some parents, they're just a thumbs up, you're doing a really good job, they're taking away some strategies. For others, they're saying, actually, this is maybe piqued my interest and I want to go on and move on. So I absolutely agree with you, Sandra, but as Kirsten said, it isn't, what we're talking about here is a proportionate universalism model. So you're not saying everybody needs the same dose of intervention, but actually, as you can see, different doses can be beneficial, both in terms of for the outcomes, but also in terms of the way in which they help recruit. We know from a large study that was done internationally looking at parents' intention to participate in a parenting program, there was no magic bullet that the researchers found. The biggest of the small effect sizes that was shown was I'm more likely to attend if I've attended in the past. So past participation. So that sounds like a bit of a chicken and an egg until you think about a multi-level system offer or an offer that might start with something like triple P for baby when your baby's born, when you're actually probably more likely to be open to an intervention, such that when you then maybe have got some challenges with your toddler at 2, 3, 4, and a practitioner says to you, oh, we've got this triple P thing. Oh, I think I did that. Oh, well, you probably did the baby one. Come along to this one. It's obviously it's slightly more age appropriate now. So there are ways in which we can exploit that. But you're right, schools is really key. I think mental health support teams are also really key in this effect. I'd love to see more of them thinking about how can we target those who are at risk of exclusion, getting in much earlier on. Because schools often rag rate and know those kids for whom they're concerned about. So how can we be targeting interventions into that space? Sorry, Sandra, you got me excited there. I said a lot.
Let Kirsten come in as well, because I think Kirsten would like to contribute.
I just want to echo a little bit of what Matt's saying, and that is that I think that there are periods in a family's life that are windows of opportunity when we actually do have evidence that these universal interventions work, particularly when you're talking about the couple relationship and co-parenting practices, which we know are associated with better behavioral child outcomes because, parents can act coercively between themselves. So, but their parents are actually, the jury is out on the effectiveness of couples therapy. But we do know that parents can benefit from co-parenting interventions before the birth of the first child. Also, when the children go to start primary school and when they start secondary school. These are points of where parents suddenly realize, I'm not sure I know what's going to happen now. And they're actually seeking more advice. So people want to be strategic about doing this. At those 3 points is particularly important, but also when parents are pulling their hair out with a 3-year-old, that's a good time too, but not advertising the intervention separately and hoping that they come, that's not particularly useful. There are models that show that at the GP surgery, maybe at the first health or the second health visiting check, if this is offered to them, that might be worth going as well. It's because what you don't want to do is offer these things in isolation, and then nobody shows up, and then everybody says they don't work. That's the wrong model. The right model is to make sure that they're offered when parents need them. And so those 3 periods are particularly good at the universal level. And then there are other periods that are good at the targeted. The other thing is we just looked at this evidence again at Foundations about these school hybrid models, and they're coming up with some pretty good results. So basically they have a system in place to identify the kids who are having problematic behavior in school. They offer an intervention to the parents as a pullout. They also work with the child individually in the school. And the findings are pretty good because you immediately have reductions in school exclusions. And then the child learns how to respond positively with their peers. And these children might need more scaffolding to do that. And if you got the school and the parents doing the same thing, the child is going to benefit. Otherwise, the child might learn how to behave well at home, but not at school, or vice versa. Well, normally it's never the other way around.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'm going to stop here because we are literally 30 seconds from past. I'm aware that we've had a couple of questions in the chat that we've not been able to answer. I think they were specifically for Kirsten's presentation earlier. So what we will do, if Kirsten doesn't mind, is we will answer those and post them on our website along with the slides and the presentation so that we've got the full completed picture. So all it remains for me to say is thank you hugely to Kirsten, Matt and Claire for their really, really informative presentations today. I hope you've all found it extremely useful like I have. And to thank you as well for attending. We really appreciate it. As I said, we are going to be running a series of these events and hopefully we can include you on our mailing list, and we'll give you the opt-out if you don't want us to contact you again, but it'd be really great if you were able to attend future ones as well. Thanks everyone. Have a good rest of afternoon. Bye.